So six areas that I wanted to talk about today and share with you. First of all, starting with the big picture. So, what we'll do is talk about what I call the consulting business maturity curve, and to think about how a consulting business grows and where demand comes from a high level perspective, and then we'll start drilling into more detail, including ways to raise your rates in right now and set yourself up to sell higher revenue services. And then we'll talk about how to determine how much to increase your rates and your pricing. And then an important prerequisite that most consultants overlook when we think about pricing. And then I'll give you the 5 steps to raise your rates. I have Q&A at the end, but of course, let's again have this as an interactive session. You can ask questions throughout. So the first thing I want to share with you is this high level picture, what I call the consulting business maturity curve. And this is something that just taking a step back and working with hundreds of independent consultants, I'm constantly thinking about what sets some consultants apart from others. Why do some consultants have more demand than they can handle? Why are consultants that have a very similar background, why are some of them charging more and others are charging less? What is the difference here? And this consulting business maturity curve gives you an insight into one of those key differences, and that is really where is your work coming from, and what does your business model look like? So when we very first start out as independent consultants or freelancers or fractional marketeers, it's very common to be dependent on the work that comes from those from recruiters, agencies, marketplaces, and you're just taking what you can get, not wanting to leave money on the table. And this, while this is a great place to start, starting to think about, as Una mentioned, building relationships and having those marketplaces like the indie lists to know who you are and what it is that you do and how you stand out, and starting to move up this curve from just really more taking the roles that come to you and figuring out how to make them work, and starting to be more proactive in what it is that you are creating in terms of what you're offering, that more control over your pipeline and where those roles are coming from, and being more selective about the types of clients that you're working with and what type of work you're doing with them, and ultimately what the pricing looks like. And then ultimately that evolves into being known for what you do, having that clear specialization, having that clear problem that you solve, showing up as a thought leader for that particular type of role. And then ultimately, and you start building inbound opportunities in that way, and then ultimately being sought after for what you do. So basically shifting your business model from having to go out and pound the pavement into your reputation precedes you, and potential clients or the indie lists know exactly what it is that you do and can think about how does what you do match up to whatever a client problem is that they're hearing about.
Melissa, can I just ask?
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking in the context of consultants there, but equally the kind of curve applies to freelancers. Doesn't matter what type of freelancer you are. Is that fair to say? So it could be a creative freelancer, could be a project manager, you could be a web designer or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It's a good point. I use the word consultants throughout this, but it's really freelancers or fractional marketeers. I'm just using that as a catch-all.
Catch-all.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Peter, you had also pointed out this particular maturity curve. Was there anything else about it that you wanted to make sure you covered?
I think from our experience of working on the indie list for the last 3 years is that there's a lot of people still kind of stuck on that kind of dependency part of the curve. Like we've run sessions before on personal branding, marketing yourself and so on. And look, that's all part of I suppose, moving along the curve, and investing the time outside of clearly working for clients to get better known, so that people are coming to you rather than you depending on, places like the indie list or other people referring you on for work. Is that fair to say? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find it very interesting, especially talking to those, you're all marketers in some way, in some form or fashion. So of course, you know how to do all of these things, but when it comes to applying it to ourselves and our own business, it can be
Yeah.
very challenging. And so taking that step back and thinking about the things you do for your clients, what does that look like to apply it to your own business?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the first thing I want to just give you some low-hanging fruit here. The low-hanging fruit is ways to increase your rates or your pricing, so that you're increasing your revenue. And what I often find is as freelancers, we ask ourselves the question, why, the questions such as why won't the client pay the amount that I want to charge? Why aren't they willing to pay my rates? We're constantly asking ourselves these questions to try to figure out what might be wrong with our business, or what might be wrong with our pricing, or what might be a limitation with the clients that we're targeting. And I want to encourage you to flip that question to ask yourself something that's much more high quality in terms of getting the answer to this question is going to be much more valuable to you than answering those questions about why you can't charge more. You could find 1,000 reasons why you can't charge more, but we want to redirect your brain to asking and answering, how can you make more money per quarter, for example, without working more? How can you raise your rates with clients being more willing to pay those rates? Asking yourself those types of questions will give you such a more direction to be able to follow versus asking yourself questions about why things won't work. So I'll give you some examples here, really falling into two buckets. The first is increasing the average contract value. How do you increase the average contract value of those clients that you are landing? So of course, you could increase your daily rates, for example, for existing clients. You might be working with some existing clients, having those conversations. I've had coaching clients in the past who are freelancers who hadn't raised their rates for clients for several years. And so they're not keeping up with the market. They're continuously providing value to those clients, but they're charging the inventory that they have for the work that they provide is decreasing over time, the value of that inventory. Another example is increasing your rates for new clients. So you might keep existing clients at the rate they're on right now for whatever reason, but increasing the rates moving forward for new clients. Following through a change order. So often we go through processes to scope out our work, and then clients are ask for more, and we just assume that work and don't charge them anything extra. So really following through and putting business processes in place where you are following through on change orders or charging for that additional scope is another way to increase the average contract value. Making new offers to past clients. So you might be at a place where you were initially starting out charging a day rate, and you rolled off of a particular client. Really going back and thinking about those past clients and the relationship you had with them. You had a unique insight into their business and what their challenges are, and coming back and offering something in addition to what you had already provided to them, to those past clients, to help to continuously add value to them based on the knowledge that and the knowledge of their organization that you've already accumulated, which is so valuable to them. Another example of increasing the average contract value is making offers to other consultants. So when you're in the top part of that maturity curve, you're starting to create more demand than you have supply, than you have time to support. And so thinking about how do you offer overflow, how do you support that overflow when you have more demand than supply, and starting to bring other consultants into the mix where they're supporting to do the overflow and you're making some percentage of that. And then the last way to increase the average contract value is adding on services to existing clients using alternative pricing models. So you might right now be charging a daily rate and want to be moving into, for example, more value-based pricing, thinking about what can you be offering to existing clients, like a retainer, for example, an advisory type retainer to those existing clients, again, to increase that overall average contract value. And then the other component that you've got in terms of a lever for yourself is decreasing the time to deliver. So you're making more money with the time that you've got available, which I like to call your inventory. This is your inventory, right? This is the amount of time you have available. How do we maximize the amount of revenue that you're creating for that time? And so shifting into things like more strategy type work, it doesn't mean that you leave the execution behind, but it does mean that you have the opportunity to add on that kind of strategy type work, or doing facilitation or training or retainer based work, shifting from time-based rates, whether it's hourly or daily, into value-based pricing. And we'll talk more about what that looks like here in a minute. And even recommending colleagues or bringing on subcontractors to support adjacent works. That happens so often where your client is likely having needs certain types of support that you may not offer yourself, but having that Rolodex, I'll date myself, a Rolodex of other colleagues that are able to provide that kind of supporting work that you're bringing in, and potentially getting a percentage of what they're doing.
Melissa, can I jump in just with a quick
Yes,
question?
Una, please.
One of my sort of bugbears is time-based rates.
Yeah.
Because I think when you offer a client a price per hour, price per day, their natural disposition would be to drive it forward, or drive it lower rather.
Yeah, right.
So I'm a really big fan of value-based pricing. In the absence of being able to do that really effectively, let's say for maybe a graphic designer or a web designer, for example, I think that being able to kind of productize what you offer just makes it really easier for the client to buy it at the price that you're offering. Would you agree with that as a strategy?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you're thinking about, there's so many different ways to approach that value-based pricing. And one of them is productizing what you're doing, especially if you're doing those types of roles that you just described, Una. In fact, my SEO consultant lives in Dublin, and and I just pay him a certain amount every month, and it's just an ongoing retainer. I have no idea. I could be paying him. I don't know if he spends 1 hour a month doing the work, or 50. I have no idea. I'm looking for the outcome of what it is that he's providing to me, and it doesn't matter how many hours it takes for him to accomplish that.
Exactly. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And that leads us into the next topic, which is how to determine what your increase is. A lot of times the question we ask ourselves is, what is the maximum they will pay? That is let me figure out how much they'll pay me and go for that. That tends to be a very common pricing approach. And what I want to offer you today is a different way of looking at this, which is really combining your business requirements. You are selling your inventory. You have inventory available, which is the amount of client capacity you have, and figuring out how that maps up to your business model, and then ultimately marrying that up with the client's perceived value. So I'll go into this in more detail here to give you an example. I find so often when I ask consultants and freelancers, what is your revenue plan for this year? They don't have one. They're hoping that last year that they can just increase what they did last year, or if they're newer to consulting or freelancing, that they replace their corporate income. Those are the common ways that we decide what we want to create from a revenue perspective. And so I would encourage you to take that to another level of detail and really be thinking about proactively, what is it that you want to land? What is the mix of services you want to sell? And for what contract value do you want to sell them? And thinking about it proactively from your own business's perspective versus reactively of, well, that client seems like they need what I offer, and let me see if I'm willing to take the amount they're wanting to pay me. We're shifting that into thinking about it from your business model and requirements to begin with. So, for example, this is a real consultant freelancer, and their business model. They're offering 4 different types of work. And the 4th one I love, so I'll get to that here in a minute. They do some content sprints, some content retainers, and some fractional CMO type work. And then they have this experimental work line, which means a client might come to them and say, do you do this? And then they've given themselves a couple of spots for the year to take on that type of work, where they want to test out different offerings and that sort of thing. It's not all the time. Let me take on all the experimental work. They've got a very intentional business model and then a line item for that experimental type work, which may fold into another engagement type at some point. So then from an average contract value perspective, for example, their fractional CMO type work is pretty high level, not very engaged, and it's $6K per month, and signing 2 of those is 60K per year. So you can see this revenue build up, and that is informing everything. That's informing their lead generation approach. That's informing their pricing approach. That's informing their floor of what they would be willing to agree to when they're negotiating with potential clients. Knowing what that ultimate business model looks like and driving what they're doing against that. And then that marries up with the client's perceived value. So when you're thinking about going into a specific deal and negotiating that and uncovering the client's value and matching that up to the pricing, it's thinking about things like, and being very clear for yourself, what is the tangible value of the work that this potential client will receive from the work that you're doing. So for example, it might be that they're increasing their number of leads, and there's a value that companies typically would put a value against each one of those leads. So you can, in a very tangible way, figure out what the value is of the work that you're doing. I'll just use my SEO guy as an example. I know that if he could drive even 2 or 3 leads through organic SEO for me every month, that it will more than pay for itself, knowing that I have whatever my close rate is and what my pricing is. And so it's a no-brainer to me to pay him what I pay him. And it's similar for you as you're thinking about for your clients, what are those tangible KPIs that you're contributing to with the work that you're doing, and folding in the questions that you're asking them in your sales cycle to uncover those numbers and build up the business case that makes sense for you to be charging them more money. And ultimately, I say landing more work because of that, because you're showing up in a much more strategic way. You're showing up as an advisor to them as a result, and setting yourself up to land more work, as you're not just an extra pair of hands, you're someone who's helping them to understand how to be more successful running their business. The other component when you think about value is the intangible value, whether it's peace of mind. I have an expert doing this. So for example, with your type of client, it might be peace of mind that they have an expert who's creating more leads and putting a repeatable engine in place for them to fill their own pipelines. So thinking about what the value of that intangible impacts are that you're making as well. And guessing, right? We're just guessing how to quantify that, but it's not something to discount either. I'll pause here before we move on to the next step. Any questions or?
I think
loads
we
of
find out all the time,
Yeah.
Melissa, sorry, the peace of mind thing, a
Yeah.
client who used a freelancer before and they know they're just going to get it. There is not kind of steep learning curve. They're straight into the work. And And, you know, in a lot of cases, the clients are just willing to pay for that because they know what the price is going to be. They know the standard of the work that is the freelancer has done before. And they just go, look, I want to hire, you know, Billy or Mary, whoever it might be, because, you know, they know what they're going to get. And it just gives them that kind of security that the output is going to be of a standard that they're really happy with. Yeah.
Yeah. I think also along those lines with that example, Peter, is also having that history with a client potentially and being able to point out to them what they're missing, what their blind spots are, that you're not just doing what they ask you to do, you're also giving them advice and helping them to round out their, their strategy.
Melissa, just one question. It's
Yeah.
kind of, you know, to get to the point where you've sort of decided that you need to kind of be more proactive about your pricing strategy. What are the sort of the big mindset shifts that you need to make in yourself? Because I mean, I think you're absolutely right. The starting point for so many people is what's the maximum they'll pay? What can I get away with? And we've
Right.
often heard people say things like, if you give the price and there isn't a sharp intake of breath, you've priced yourself too low.
That's
That's
right.
just not a strategy. So
No.
what are the things you need to get over in your own head?
Yeah.
Be
This
more
is
dispassionate about it.
yes. This is a perfect question, Una. I'm going to go to the next slide here.
Ah, great.
So to answer your question and to point this out, because it's really important, the prerequisite to changing any of your pricing is to look first at your mindset and sell yourself first. It is not your client's job or your potential client's job to give you confidence about your pricing because they say yes to it. It is your job to feel confident about that pricing first, even if no one's ever agreed to it, in order to set yourself up to be successful in offering that pricing. And so the prerequisite to shifting your rates, whether it be the amount you're charging or the nature of the way that you're charging, from day rates to value-based pricing, for example, is to shift your mindset first, to sell yourself first. And the way that I like to look at this is in 3 areas. The first is your mindset about yourself. We could argue today, it's one of my favorite topics. Are you really selling yourself? I do not believe you are selling yourself. You are not selling, you are selling an outcome to your clients. And so thinking about it and separating, because so many of us take this so personally as freelancers or solo consultants, that we're it, right? We're the only thing we have to offer. And so we get into this headspace where we think we're selling ourselves. And then a lot of the emotional attachment comes into play here, where we might feel guilty that we're charging that amount, or we might feel inadequate to be charged. Who are we to charge that amount? And it all starts creating this mindset that is not in your favor. And so the first thing that I recommend is, when you think about the pricing mindset, is separating out yourself from what you are selling to the client, which is they are looking for outcomes. They are looking for results. They are looking for whatever it is that you deliver for your clients, and separating that out so that you can be more confident in the process that you walk a client through in your sales process, and ultimately the proposals and the pricing that you're coming up to with to offer to those clients. Which leads into the second component of pricing mindset, which is really getting clear about the value of what you do. So thinking about what we talked about a moment ago, what are those tangible impacts that you're making for your clients? And you can do this in 2 ways. You can do it in a more generic way. When you think about each of your offerings, what is the general value of what you do, both tangibly and intangibly? And then use that to reverse engineer your sales process so that you are asking questions during the sales cycle that help to fill in the blanks of how might I calculate the value to this particular client? And getting really clear that what you're creating some space between what is the value of that they are would be achieving compared to what it is that you're pricing and charging to them. Like, for example, if we go back to my SEO consultant, he's charging me something that I would say 3 to 5x what the actual value is. There's a good space there from a mindset perspective. And then the last component to your pricing mindset is what you think about your clients. What do you think about their willingness to pay you what your pricing is? What do you think about their willingness to get budget for what it is that you would be charging them? Really thinking about, so often we don't give ourselves credit here. We think, well, I'm going to have to overcome this big hurdle. They're not going to be willing to pay that. Again, shifting that into how would they be willing to pay what it is you're charging? How would it be a no-brainer to them to pay you what your rates or your pricing now looks like? And getting yourself into that headspace, because you approach them so differently. If you think this is a no-brainer, there's so much more value than what it is that I'm charging them versus, oh no, they're going to say no, but I'm going to try this and see what happens. You come across so differently in that process when you've got this mindset in place. So those are the 3 areas that I recommend you start thinking about to sell yourself first, before then you start moving through this process of increasing your rates. Una, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did, absolutely.
Okay.
I think you're absolutely right. When you think about it slightly differently, you just become a little bit more confident, and you take the kind of the personal out of it, which is one of the things that sort of makes it difficult for you to have those conversations, which can be very, very awkward, you know. And when you kind of take the personal out of it, you just remove that awkwardness, and you become kind of more dispassionate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Melisa.
So next we have a couple more slides and then we'll do some more Q&A. So get ready with your questions. I know Peter has a few to ask as well. The 5 steps that I like to give you to raise your consulting rates or your freelancer fees, however you want to describe it. The first is getting clear on that value. So we just talked through that. Getting clear on why you're increasing your rates. What does the value look like to your client? What does your own business model need to look like to support your goals? Then the second step, so we talked about this one a few slides ago. The second is to sell yourself. So we talked about that. It's not your client's job to make you feel better about your pricing. It's your job to create that confidence ahead of time. And you can do that with the mindset exercises I just gave you. Then you'll create your plan. So what does your new pricing look like? What is your average contract value for each of those engagement types, for example? And it might be different for a new business versus existing business. Really thinking about it that way, and how might you transition existing clients into your new pricing? And then you implement your new pricing. And then you might make some mistakes. It might not go the way you anticipated it to go. A lot of times we think that's a problem. Is that you're a business owner. You're constantly iterating and evaluating and adjusting and experimenting as a business owner. And so really taking that edge off of, oh no, I lost the deal, for example, or that didn't go the way I expected it to, and giving yourself a process of, what does it look like to shift the way I'm pricing or how much I'm charging, and evaluating against that, and creating an iterative process here, so that ultimately your business development playbook is stronger. It might be that you need to increase the quality of your leads in order to sell the type of work that you want to be selling for the rates you want to be selling. It might be that you need to do a better job with your sales process and the questions you're asking to support your business case. Really asking yourself and iterating through that is what ultimately will help you to get to the place where you're charging the types of rates you want to be charging to meet your business model. So I'll give you a quick example here, and then I've got a couple of tools for you, and then we'll do questions. So I had a freelancer consultant that I was working with, and they came in and wanted to increase, they were at a place where they wanted to make more money. And so we started off with, but they were scared, right? They didn't want to turn away business. They didn't want to make less money because they were charging more. And so what we did is put this plan in place, these 5 steps. We started off and got really clear about what the value was to their clients, what the both new value that they might not have been thinking about before when they were articulating their services and solutioning, and also unexpected value. Thinking about, I always like to use a past client and reprice them. So thinking back to a past client, now that you know all the things that you didn't know at the time that you priced them and sold that piece of work, really going back and doing it in a retrospective way to say, okay, now that that engagement is over and I know everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly of this client, how would I have done this differently? And thinking back to from the very beginning, what were the questions that you asked in the sales cycle? How were you showing up in the sales cycle? Were you nervous and kind of jittery about what it is you were offering? Or were you curious and trying to understand what the client wanted and why they wanted that? And understanding the value to them and their perceived value. And then ultimately developing that new approach. So based on those learnings, building up a business case in your mind of, okay, in this example, it was an increase of 35%. How this particular consultant was able to figure out, okay, I know using those past examples that I could have charged at least 35% more for that same type of work, knowing what I know now, and then infusing that into their sales process so that they're asking, what types of questions to add to their sales process, to know what types of qualification they want to make from a lead quality perspective, and consistently evolving their process as a result of that. So hopefully that gives you an example of how you would put these 5 steps into place. Before we open it up to questions, I will give you a couple of tools. So the first is I have a pricing assessment. So you can come in, answer 12 questions, and it helps you to look at your business and what your pricing framework, where the areas of opportunity may be from a pricing framework perspective. So you can take that. It's at icpricing.com. It's a free assessment, and we'll give you a report on an action plan on areas of opportunity for you in your business. And then I think Peter alluded to this, but I wanted to give away my book as well. So there's an entire chapter just on pricing frameworks. I lost track of which chapter it is, maybe chapter 6 or so, but it's the 14 steps to grow your consulting business or your freelance business. And you can either go to my website, melisaliberman.com/book, or you can just grab it from that QR code. So it is a free download of the book and also a toolkit that goes with the book to help you put each chapter in place in your business. So that's what I have for you today.
That